Hi, it's Chris and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to do a vinyl finds video. I've not done one of these actually for quite a while, and the reason for that is I haven't bought very much actually. I haven't found any kind of decent albums, or certainly decent albums at a decent price. But in the last couple of weeks I've managed to pick up some real cheap stuff, like £1-2 kind of stuff. And there's some really interesting albums among this batch. Quite an eclectic mix actually. So tell me what you think in the comments below. The first one up is a best of. It's the best of the Ramsey Lewis trio. It's called Choice. It's on Chess Records, and I think it's from the kind of mid-60s actually. It's a really good summary of his early stuff, the kind of swing club jazz era of his work. So there is some swing kind of stuff on it. There's also some a nod towards the R&B and funky grooves that, you know, the direction he took music on from around about this time in '66 actually, because this came out in the same year as the In Crowd, and that new direction is starting to show. Now, it must be hard to summarise actually such a vast career. I think he'd done about 20 albums before this actually came out, so summarising that must be quite difficult. So there is kind of indication of that new direction, that kind of funky R&B groove thing, but there's also some R&B stuff on here as well. For example, Memphis in June. So a good representation of his early career up into the mid-60s. So nice album by the Ramsey Lewis trio. Next up is, I think they're from Liverpool, this band actually. They're called Nuts, and this is the album called Live Cuts, a pretty hard-working touring band. This was on A&M, so they had a pretty prestigious label kind of contract. This is from 1977, and in that kind of time live albums were really in, double live ones especially. This is only a single one, and actually turned out to be their last album actually, but it's a pretty good summary of the work that they did up until this point. And I say up until this point because in the early 80s they kind of repackaged themselves as a band called Rage. But they're often seen as forerunners of the new wave of British heavy metal. I'm not really sure why in many ways, just because they were a rock band in the late 70s, I guess. But they did actually appear on the Metal for Mothers compilation that came out in 1980 that featured Iron Maiden and Praying Mantis amongst others. So not bad. You know, I think it's a good summary of their stuff, and it shows a band in full flight in a live kind of capacity. So, and that was only £1. For a couple of quid, I picked up this. Now, this is the blues band live. It's called Bye Bye Blues. I love this band. I would have loved to have seen the blues band live. I reckon it would have been such good fun. So if you like kind of authentic rhythm and blues, you're going to absolutely love this. I've got quite a few albums by them. In fact, I've probably got all of their albums actually. This may be the last one that I needed to complete the discography. As I said, I wish I'd seen them live, because when you listen to this, it's like 12 tracks. It's really good value, and I said really good fun. It's the last gig, I think it was recorded at the last ever gig they did actually, prior to reforming in kind of late 80s. But this is from 82, 83. It's recorded at the Venue in London, and it has a number of kind of covers on it. So Maggie's Farm by Bob Dylan is on here. There's a Chuck Berry cover, Son House cover. So you know, it's just a good kind of, as I said, authentic rhythm and blues kind of album. It's got some really nice boogie woogie piano from Rolling Stones legend Ian Stu Stewart. It also has Phil May, the singer from Pretty Things, guest on here as well. So a variety of vocalists, instrumentally, you know, really strong, and a really just a good fun album. So if you like rhythm and blues, you're going to love that. Next up is a southern rock band, quite an obscure one in some ways actually, although I think they did dent the chart with a track from this album actually. The band is Stillwater. So this is their debut album on Capricorn Records from 1977. And this isn't bad. You can tell it's a southern rock band even without listening to it. Look how many players there are, ridiculous. This is a band from Georgia, and as I said, this is their debut album from 1977 on Capricorn. So that was the Allman Brothers label, amongst others. It was recorded, this album, in the same place as Lynyrd Skynyrd recorded Sweet Home Alabama. And it has a kind of a southern rock feel actually to it. There's one track on here that said, I think did dent the charts in the US, not in the UK, Mindbender, which features, that voice box thing that was kind of made famous by Peter Frampton. I think Joe Perry from Aerosmith used it, Joe Walsh certainly did on Rocky Mountain Way. So that's not a bad song actually, and I said I think it charted in the US. So lots of players. I think there's 7 in the band there. Got 3 guitarists. That's a hallmark of the southern rock kind of thing. It's fairly obscure in many ways. It's a bit smooth in places, almost a little bit Steely Dan in places actually. Maybe even sort of Bolin era James Gang as well. But it does have its real southern rock moments as well. So there's a kind of extended jam on here called Sam's Jam, which is very, very southern and a bit Freebirdy. Now, I think every southern rock band had their own version of Freebird. So Doc Holliday had Lonesome Guitar. Blackfoot did Highway Song. Molly Hatchet had Boogie No More. The Outlaws had Green Grass and High Tides. That kind of thing. And Sam's Jam is certainly that. So if you like southern rock and you like the kind of smoother end of southern rock, you probably really, really like this album. So there's the debut album Stillwater on Capricorn from 1977. Now, the next up is an artist. I don't have many albums by him, actually. I think this is only the 3rd thing I bought by him. This is from 1977. This is Roy Harper and Bullin a Ming Vase. I think in the States it might be called One of Those Days in England, which is a song that opens the album, and also an extended version forms side 2. Now the extended version, which is parts 2 to 10, has several movements to it and a whole range of instrumentation. So there's some orchestration in it, there's some steel guitar, and there's some beautiful kind of acoustic guitar throughout the whole thing actually. So but what the track One of Those Days in England, the long version of it for sure, has lots of changing moods and kind of almost tells a story really, as does the track that closes side 1 called Watford Gap, which I think in later versions of this was removed through objections from the service station at Watford Gap, which is just north of London. So the lyrics on it are fantastic. It's the Watford Gap, a plate of grease and a load of crap. And it's a quite a funny song actually. As I said, replaced on later copies. So lyrically really excellent, musically excellent too, and some lovely acoustic guitar. Roy Harper's a superb guitarist. The track One of Those Days in England, which opens the album, I think if that had come out in the early 70s, would have undoubtedly been a hit. It's just so melodic, it's beautiful. And I also love Cherishing the Lonesome as well. So really nice album from Roy Harper from 1977. That's on EMI Records. So good stuff. Next up is a Canadian band. This is a band that were on Mercury, so the same label as Rush. They were produced, this album anyway is produced by a guy called Kim Mitchell, who was the main man in Max Webster. The band is Coney Hatch, which is a bizarre name really, but it's named, this is fairly random really, it's named after a Victorian asylum in North London called Coney Hatch, which is, as I said, a bit random. So they're a Canadian band, and this is their debut from 1982. Now, as I said, produced by Kim Mitchell from Max Webster. It's a really great production. It's pretty meaty, actually. It's good, and it's not bad. It's a bit Foreigner-esque, actually. And their vocalist Andy Curran certainly sounds a bit like, is it Lou Gramm from Foreigner? Has that kind of sound. And I think he's gone on also to work with Alex Lifeson on his Envy of None project actually, so I'd be interested to hear a little bit more of that. So good vocalist, reasonably good kind of hard rock album actually. They did an album after this called Out of Hand, I think it is, which is probably not as good, but this is a great album if you like kind of melodic hard rock. Steve Harris, the main guy behind Iron Maiden, he apparently loved the opening track called Devil's Deck, so much so that he asked Coney Hatch to tour with his solo band British Lions as a result. So yeah, pretty good slice of sort of radio rock, hard rock, maybe with a slightly harder edge than the kind of Foreigner sound. Next up is an album that I bought almost to complete the main discography of a particular band. And it's probably prog fans will be very familiar with this album. And this divides opinion, I think, with fans of prog and certainly fans of Yes. This is is this about the seventh or eighth album, possibly? I don't know, something like that. So 1973-ish, I think. It's Tales of Topographic Oceans. It's based on 4 Hindu texts, apparently, so not pretentious, of course. It's got a lovely Roger Dean cover, as he did quite a few of their covers. I love the cover. In fact, I love the cover more than the album. For me, this summarises the excesses of prog rock, really. It's complex, it's a difficult listen. This is the US version, hence the ringwear. So yeah, it was just a way of kind of completing a discography, I think, really, of certainly all the albums that I wanted by this band. And also, I do love the cover, but I don't know how many times I listened to it. Some people love it, I'm sure. Next up is probably a highly influential album, actually. It's by Eno, and it's called Another Green World, which I've seen a couple of people show actually recently on the vinyl community. This is Eno's third album, came out in '75 on Island Records, although this is an 80s repress on EG Records. It's got Robert Fripp on it, inevitably. It also has Phil Collins and Percy Jones, both of which were playing with Brand X at the time. I think John Cale also turns up on this album. And this is moving much more towards his kind of ambient period. So there's 14 tracks and 5 of those only have vocals, the rest are instrumental. And it features a whole host of kind of oddly named instruments on it. So snake guitar, uncertain piano, castanet guitar. There's also Leslie piano on here, which I guess is a piano played through a Leslie speaker, I would think. But certainly calmer than his previous work, and to these ears anyway, a lot more listenable, if I'm really honest, because I struggle sometimes with his stuff. So kind of the edges are smoothed out a little bit in here. It's kind of quite poppy in places, and I'm sure this album, and certainly this guy's work, but this album would have been very influential on some of the kind of synth pop bands that came out in the kind of late 70s, early 80s. People like maybe later Ultravox, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, that kind of stuff. So a nice slice of electronic pop, of art rock, lots of kind of changing song structures and mixed instrumentation. It's very synthesizer heavy. It's got that kind of repeated rhythm sort of stuff to it. As I said, much more listenable than his previous stuff, which, to be honest, I found quite jarring at times. So I think it's certainly the easiest of his albums to like, if I'm honest. Bizarrely, this album features in the top 500 albums of all time as put out by Rolling Stone magazine, which I think is probably pushing the point a little bit. But I think of what I've heard anyway, I probably would have said that this could be his definitive album. Although I do know people who like his kind of ambient period but more. Next one is a 70s album by someone who really made his name probably in the 50s and 60s as a kind of a big band player, a drummer extraordinaire. And this is A Different Drummer by Buddy Rich. I think this album was called Superstar in the States, and the reason for that is the track that opens the album is called Superstar, and it's the Jesus Christ Superstar song. In fact, there's another song from that show as well. I can't think which one offhand. A really funky take actually on Superstar. It 70s Buddy Rich is not particularly very common actually, and this is got some of that big band sound that he was famous for. There's also got some swing, some jazz, and even some fusion on here actually. And as I said, some quite funky takes on a couple of Jesus Christ Superstar songs. So called Superstar in the States, I think it's trying to be possibly a bit more hip. And I think actually it would have been really interesting for him to pursue the kind of fusion sound actually. I think that might have really worked for him actually, but quite an enjoyable album. And again, for £1, can't go wrong, can you? This was the only charity shop album that I've picked up recently, and this was £1 as well. It's in really nice condition, and it's Thriller by Eddie and the Hot Rods. So Eddie and the Hot Rods were British pub rock stalwarts. I would have loved to have seen this band as well live. I think they would have been brilliant. There's a couple of tracks on here that did make it out as singles, so The Power and the Glory and Media Messiahs, both of which are really good songs. This is proper powerful stuff, actually. It just was a bit kind of unfashionable at the time. This came out in '79. You know, music was changing quite a lot. You know, you had synth rock, synth pop coming out, and kind of ska and that kind of stuff was around. So quite unfashionable. The kind of new wavy sound was going, but loads of really up-tempo rockers, great vocals from their singer, what's his name, Barry Masters, is it? I think Barry Masters. Just really energetic stuff, and I said for £1, fantastic. So that's Thriller from Eddie and the Hot Rods from 1979. The next up is an album that I actually bought in 1977. It was either late 77 or early 78, I can't remember, but in the summer of 77 there were two songs I couldn't stop playing. One was called Swallow My Pride, the other one was Sheena is a Punk Rocker. And I pretty soon after listening to those two singles bought the second album by the Ramones, which is Leave Home. And the version I've got hasn't got a track on here. Now, I picked this up in a shop for £3, which I thought was absolutely amazing. This is the US version of it. And on here, we've got a track called Carbona Not Glue. Now, Carbona was, I think, a company that made cleaning solvents. And obviously saying Carbona not glue, you know, it's much better to have Carbona, gives you a better hit and all that kind of stuff than glue, was not a great thing. And eventually, due to a lawsuit, I think that had to be replaced. It was replaced by a track called Babysitter, which is on the album version I have, although it's not credited on the back. I think it was later replaced by Sheena is a Punk Rocker as well. But this is just fantastic. So I Remember You, Oh, I Love Her So, which are just brilliant. Susie is a Headbanger, Pinhead, Swallow My Pride. You know, this is an absolutely fantastic album. I've always loved this album, and I was quite pleased to pick up the version with Carbona Not Glue on it. Next up, jazz album. I haven't played this very much at all. This is Montgomery Land, so Wes Montgomery playing alongside his brothers Monk and Buddy. Nice cheap jazz album. This is only a couple of quid. It's got a version of Summertime, which I think Janis Joplin made famous. It's an up-tempo version. It's not as good as the Janis Joplin version, but it's a kind of a jazzy version of it, I guess. So fairly listenable. It's on Vogue Records. It's a bit crackly actually, but you know, it was really super cheap, so not bad stuff. Next up, this is absolutely brilliant. This is Fenton Robinson and Someone Loan Me a Dime from 1974. Lots of reworked songs that he did in the 60s. It features a song called Somebody Loan Me a Dime, which is a song that Boz Scaggs kind of not made famous, but did in about 1970. It's a long version on possibly Boz Scaggs' debut album, actually. It features a guitar of Duane Allman. If you've not heard it, it's sublime, absolutely sublime. The version on here is a lot shorter. It's under 3 minutes, whereas I think it's about 11 minutes on Boz Scaggs' album. But this is a fantastic album. It's soulful, it's funky, it's got kind of funky horns, heavy bass. It really swings. It's got like perfect understated blues guitar on it. It's just beautiful. One of my favourite blues albums. I don't know why I've never had it. I think because I found it difficult to find it. I actually got this on eBay. I got it for a really good price actually on eBay. So superb vocals. This guy could probably sing a variety of genres actually. Great voice, lovely guitar. One of my favourite blues albums. If you've not heard it, you should. It's fantastic. One of my favourite blues players, and I think this is a guy who was definitely at his best when he played the blues, is Rory Gallagher. And this is an album I didn't know existed, actually. I thought I'd completed the discography of Rory Gallagher, got all his solo stuff and all the Taste albums. And I stumbled across this the other day in a local record shop just for a couple of quid. It's called In the Beginning, Rory Gallagher. It's on Emerald Gem Records. It came out in '74. And what it is, and it's very, very short. It would have been an EP, if I'm honest. It's only about 12 minutes each side. There's the track list in there. It's early session from Taste. So I don't think anyway. I'd have to check, but I don't think any of these songs made it onto the debut album by Taste. So these were done in a session prior to Taste producing an album, and it was an unreleased album. And eventually in '74 they did release it. But if you like the blues and you like Rory Gallagher, and I do, I love that combination, and you'll love this. So I think Rory Gallagher is at his best when he's playing the blues, and this is a really, really nice slice of Rory Gallagher playing the blues. So if you've not seen it, and you do see it in for a reasonable price in a shop, pick it up. You won't be disappointed if you like that kind of music. So there you go. There's my dozen or so albums that I've picked up over the last couple of months. Tell me what you think in the comments below, and I hope to be back sometime soon with a video to show you more stuff that I've picked up. Cheers everyone. Take care. Bye bye.